What if I told you that a motorcycle manufacturer once built an engine so bulletproof, so over-engineered, so stubbornly indestructible, that keeping it in production was actually bad for business? Not because it was unpopular, not because it was underpowered, not because riders didn't love it, but because once someone bought one, they simply never needed to buy another. No catastrophic failures, no expensive rebuilds, no midlife crisis forcing an upgrade. Just mile after mile after mile of mechanical obedience. Like the engine had made a personal vow to outlive its owner. This is the story of the BMW K-Series engine. Nicknamed, affectionately and mockingly in equal measure, the Flying Brick. It may be the most legendary, most underappreciated, and most quietly subversive power plant in the entire history of motorcycling. And by the end of this, you'll understand exactly why something this good could only end one way. Act 1. The World Before the Brick. To understand why the Flying Brick exists, you have to feel the ground shaking in 1968. That's the year Honda released the CB750, 4 cylinders, overhead cam, electric start, disc brake. It was available at your local dealer, and it was faster, smoother, and more refined than almost anything that had come before it. At a price ordinary people could actually afford? The motorcycle world didn't just change. It collapsed and rebuilt itself overnight. The British industry, once the envy of the world, simply couldn't respond fast enough. Norton Triumph BSA. These were names etched into the history of motorcycling, and one by one they folded. Some slowly, some suddenly, but the direction was inevitable. Even continental European manufacturers felt the earthquake, because Japan didn't stop at Honda. Kawasaki answered with the 900Z1, arguably quicker than the CB750 and just as refined. Suzuki and Yamaha followed. By the mid-1970s, the Japanese Big Four had seized the mainstream motorcycle market with an iron grip. BMW was insulated for a while. Their reputation was different. BMW riders weren't buying performance. They were buying precision, longevity, and the unmistakable character of the air-cooled, horizontally opposed boxer twin. That engine had powered BMW motorcycles since 1923. It was more than a power plant, it was an identity. But by the late 1970s, even that identity was under threat. Emissions regulations in Europe and North America were tightening every year. The Boxer twin, for all its soul was aging, it struggled with the new standards, and the engineering headroom to fix it was shrinking fast. BMW's management looked at their options and made a decision that would have terrified a more conservative company. They wouldn't refine the Boxer. They wouldn't copy the Japanese. They would invent something that didn't exist yet. Act 2. The revolutionary design. In 1983, BMW unveiled the K100, and the reaction was complicated. This was not a beautiful motorcycle. Where the Boxer had roundness and warmth, the K100 had angles. Lots of them. The engine looked like someone had taken a large aluminum brick, the kind you'd find holding open a door, and bolted it underneath the frame. Which, in essence, is exactly what they did. The nickname appeared almost immediately. Someone called it a flying brick. The press picked it up. Riders used it. BMW engineers reportedly winced. The name was not flattering, and it was completely, perfectly accurate. But the genius, and this is the part that matters, was invisible unless you knew what to look for. BMW's engineers, working closely with the car division, had taken an inline 4-cylinder engine and rotated it 90 degrees. Instead of standing upright or across the frame like every Japanese competitor, the K100's engine lay completely on its side. Horizontal. Like it had been knocked over and bolted down before anyone noticed. No mass-produced motorcycle in the world had done this, not one. And the advantages of this single decision cascaded into every corner of the design. The center of gravity. An engine lying flat, low in the frame, drops the bike's mass toward the ground. The K100 handled with a planted stable authority that upright inline-fours couldn't match. The shaft drive. Because the crankshaft ran longitudinally and front to back, it pointed directly toward the rear wheel. No 90-degree bevel gears to redirect power sideways. Power flowed cleanly and efficiently to the rear wheel, with minimal parasitic loss. And a shaft drive means no chain to stretch, snap, adjust, or replace every few thousand miles. The serviceability. With the cylinder head on the left and the crankcase on the right, a mechanic or an owner in their driveway could access virtually everything without removing the engine from the frame. Valve adjustments, top-end work, oil changes, all of it approachable without a complete teardown. The structure. BMW used the engine block itself as a stressed member of the chassis. The brick didn't just sit inside the frame, it was part of the frame. The front pivot for the rear swing arm was integrated directly into the engine casting. Weight was saved. Rigidity was gained. Two problems solved with one solution. They called the whole architecture the compact drive system. That's where the K comes from. It wasn't a marketing name, it was a literal description. As for technology, the K100 arrived in 1983 equipped with dual overhead camshafts, electronic ignition, and Bosch LE Jetronic fuel injection. The same injection system BMW was fitting to their road cars. On a motorcycle in 1983. Fuel injection wouldn't become standard across the motorcycle industry for another 20 years. BMW's car division had given them an enormous advantage, and they used every bit of it. Act 3, the legendary reliability. Here's where the story stops being about engineering and starts being about mythology. Because the K-Series didn't just work, it worked forever. The first reports came in quietly. Owners logging 80,000 miles, 100,000 miles with no significant mechanical issues. Then 150,000, then 200,000. Then rally after rally started featuring K-Series bikes with odometers that had lapped past numbers most engines never dream of. Verified cases emerged of K-Series engines, K100s, K75s, K1100s, accumulating 400,000, even 500,000 miles on original internals, with nothing but routine maintenance, oil changes, coolant flushes, the occasional set of brake pads. 500,000 miles. Think about that. A modern car engine is considered exceptional at 200,000. How? Again, you follow the engineering decisions. The horizontal layout meant heat rose naturally away from the cylinder head, reducing thermal stress on the most critical components. The precise Bosch fuel injection maintained optimal air-fuel ratios regardless of temperature or altitude, preventing the lean running damage that destroyed many carbureted engines. The shaft drive eliminated the single most common wear point on any chain-driven motorcycle, and BMW's manufacturing standards, inherited from a company that builds vehicles for Autobahn speeds and 100,000-kilometer warranties, ensured every tolerance was tight and every surface was finished properly. The K75, the three-cylinder variant created by simply removing one cylinder from the K100 block earned an even more fervent reputation. Lighter than the 4, smoother by nature of its firing order, and fitted with a counterbalance shaft to quell vibrations, the K75 became a cult machine. Quiet, refined, ruthlessly reliable. Many serious K-Series enthusiasts will tell you the K75 is simply the most dependably long-lived motorcycle engine ever put into mass production. Full stop. Police forces across Germany, France, Austria, and beyond standardized on the K100RT and K100LT for fleet use. Police departments don't care about styling or brand loyalty. They care about uptime, maintenance cost, and predictability. The Flying Brick scored perfectly on all three. These machines ran tens of thousands of miles per year on patrol duty and kept running. ACT4, Evolution, and the Empire expands. Through the mid to late 1980s, BMW didn't rest. They kept building on the Brick's foundation. In 1985 came the K75 family, and the three-cylinder smaller sibling that brought the K-Series to a wider audience. In 1988, BMW made motorcycle history again by offering the world's first motorcycle ABS as an option on the K-Series. Anti-lock brakes on a motorcycle in 1988. Most cars didn't even have ABS as standard yet. Also in 1988 came the K1, the most aerodynamic motorcycle of its era, encased in so much sculpted bodywork that it looked like something from a futuristic film. Still the Flying Brick inside. Still the horizontal 4, but now dressed in a wind tunnel-tested shell that pushed the concept into genuinely exotic territory. The 1991 K1100LT expanded displacement to 1,093 cubic centimeters and brought a level of touring comfort that rivaled automobiles. German law at the time enforced a gentleman's agreement among manufacturers. No motorcycle should exceed 100 horsepower. BMW couldn't chase outright power numbers, so instead they engineered torque. Massive, accessible, low RPM torque that pulled effortlessly from idle. Riders described it as riding a very fast, very well-dressed sofa. Then came 1996 and the K1200RS, the pinnacle of the original architecture. 1,171 cubic centimeters, 130 horsepower, breaking the old German cap for the first time. 250 kilometers per hour, top speed. A brand new aluminum frame built by Italian specialist Verlichi. Front duo-lever suspension, rear paralever, single-sided swing arm, electronically sophisticated, ferociously capable. And still, at its heart, a lying-down inline-four built to the philosophy of the original Flying Brick. Overbuilt, over-engineered, made to last. Act 5. The Death of the Brick. So if all of this was true, if the engine was this capable, this reliable, this beloved, why did BMW stop building it? In 2005, after more than 2 decades, the original K-Series horizontal architecture was retired. The next generation K1200S used a conventional upright transverse inline-four. Modern, powerful, familiar. BMW's stated reasons were practical. Tightening global emission standards were harder to satisfy with a horizontal layout. Catalytic converters and their associated heat management were easier to engineer around an upright engine. And the new format allowed BMW to reach power figures 160, 170, eventually 200 horsepower that the older architecture simply couldn't accommodate. all of this is true, none of it tells the whole story. Because among the community of flying brick owners, there has always been another conversation, a quieter one. One spoken at rallies over coffee when the odometers get mentioned. An engine that runs 500,000 miles doesn't generate parts revenue. It doesn't bring customers to the service department. It doesn't make a compelling case for trading in and upgrading. The flying brick was financially inconvenient. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded so completely that it removed the very economic pressures that keep customers cycling back through showrooms. The most durable product is rarely the most profitable one. The flying brick proved that in the most spectacular way imaginable. Today, a good flying brick can be bought for a few $1,000s, sometimes less, and that machine, properly serviced, may genuinely outlast every modern motorcycle currently on the market. There's a community of K-Series riders who have never owned anything else, who buy a second brick when the first one gets too pristine for daily use, who trade maintenance tips in forums that are still active 40 years after the first K100 rolled off the line, who talk about their bikes the way people talk about old friends, because that's what they've become. The flying brick didn't become legendary because it was the prettiest motorcycle, or the fastest, or even the most technologically dazzling. Though for 1983, it was genuinely all three. It became a legend because someone at BMW made a decision that the automotive and motorcycle industries rarely make. Build it right. Build it once. Build it to last. And in a world that profits deeply and structurally from things wearing out, that is a genuinely radical act. Maybe that's why they stopped building it. Or maybe, and this is the thought that should stay with you, maybe they just couldn't afford not to.